Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Council Member Isaiah Thomas. Our own Lance Haver will discuss rising gas prices. And Denise Clay Murray will be here to tell us about the 2023 NABJ Convention and National Association of Black Journalists. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Back from vacation. Always nice to get away to where I grew up, where there is no television, radio, and only sporadic internet.
In a way, that sounds like a paradise.
It's kind of nice. I give my cell phone to my family when they go into town to pick up my emails. An unusual agreement, but works.
If it works, it works. So later in the show, you'll be telling us about gas prices. Denise will tell us about the convention. And
my wife and I certainly felt the gas prices as we drove all the way. It was not shocking, but it was upsetting.
Yeah. All right. So before we get to that, we're going to run our interview that we did with Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. All right. Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I always look forward to the dialogue.
So before we get into what's happening in the future and recent past, let's look back a little bit. What are your thoughts on how the budget turned out?
Budgets are always an interesting time and an interesting process. As one of 17 legislators, I'm never going to get everything I want. But I am satisfied at some of the investments that we were able to make, as well as some of the signals we were able to send out there as it relates to city council. Clearly, we're operating in a time where we have a surplus. So I was excited to see more dollars spent on prevention-based initiatives, from stuff we're doing around Philly Hoops Legendary Month, to investments in the arts and culture, to other out-of-school time-based initiatives. That really put a smile on my face. Clearly, I feel like we can do more. We've staffed up on the rec side as well as on the library side. We know we need capital investment there as well too, but the hours of operations are there. I think those are some of the highlights and things that I'm proud of as it relates to the budget. We were able to pass a tax cut as well too, which I think is the right direction to go in coming out of the pandemic. The pandemic taught us a couple things. It taught us, number one, that people have learned to adapt and work from anywhere. And when that happens, it leads to number two, which is that as a city, we rely more on our wage tax, and we have a tax structure where taxes can move to the point where as though we lost more revenue than any other major city in the entire country besides Detroit when the pandemic hit. So what are we doing to help grow the base? What are we doing to make sure that people understand Philadelphia is open for business? We want to encourage people to start their business, keep their business, and grow their business here. And I think this budget was a step in the right direction. Clearly, there are other things that I would have liked to have seen, even more of an investment in arts and culture, even more of an investment in prevention-based initiatives, more investment as far as capital money in schools. Clearly, my position on the schools and the facility crisis is one that's probably more aggressive than most other legislators. But I just think now is the time. And with the court ruling and the surplus that we have a unique opportunity to fix a problem that's been in existence for generations at this point. So I guess that's the quick synopsis of some of the highlights from this year's budget, as well as some of my concerns. And, I was glad that we were able to get something done that continues some of the progress that we've seen across the city.
And you had mentioned the education hearing that you chaired last week. Can you tell us a little bit about the scope of that problem and then what you took away from the hearing?
I mean, the scope of the problem is that we have a facilities crisis, whether you're talking about asbestos or other issues that exist, from athletic spaces to academic spaces. Our facilities are pretty much in a bad status right now. And so what we talked about in the hearing was exploring, first recognizing that this is not just an isolated issue as it relates to Philadelphia, it's a national problem. But during the hearing, recognizing best practices and things that have been done other places. You're talking about a massive overhaul as it relates to seeing improvement in a lot of different schools. The hearing was to, number one, explore best practices and things that took place in other areas, but then also try to see if the appetite is here as it relates to the powers that be in the city of Philadelphia to have a third party, to have another entity where we can pour a significant amount of money in to try to see what that can do to be more efficient and effective as it relates to building new school buildings.
And, coming out of that hearing, you had people from Rhode Island, people from Maryland who came in to talk about different things that they do in their areas. Did you hear anything that you thought, oh, that might work here, or is it still kind of a work in progress?
I mean, of course, it's a work in progress, but I think they gave us a lot to think about. They were able to listen to some of the plans that the school district of Philadelphia has, and they were able to, offer a few more recommendations as it relates to operating costs and other things that we know we'll need in order to put a quality plan together. So, we heard recommendations and ideas around creating the actual plan, what components of the plan needs to be there, who should be a part, who should be in the kitchen, helping bake that particular plan, what type of credentials and experiences are needed. We also were able to see the importance of having a third party agency. I think that was the biggest sentiment that was communicated, is that this is best done when there's a public-private partnership and the school district itself can focus on things like academic achievement, climate, culture, and curriculum, public safety, extracurricular activities. The list, the Rolodex of things that they're responsible for is pretty long. And I think the common thread that we found was that if we can pull the responsibility of building new facilities away from the district and have a third party focus on that, not only will it give us an opportunity to see every dollar that's invested, that's earmarked for facilities, go to facilities, it will give us an opportunity to assure that the work is being done while other holes are being filled as it relates to the education system.
So where does that conversation go from here? Are there going to be more hearings? Is there going to be legislation?
So the next step for us is to try to organize the support that we need from the proper parties to be able to make this an actual thing. Clearly, support from the mayor's office is something that we're pushing for, creating a timeline on when this process can be started as it relates to PIDC, getting PIDC on board, because that's the entity that I recommend, but assuring that that's the right place. That's just our recommendation. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right place, but it's a lot of organizing that's going to have to take place between PIDC or another third party, the mayor's office, the school board, working with the superintendent as well as next mayor. I think when you look at the responsibility of council, we have the support of our state legislators. Federal partners are also on board with the concept, but to actualize it, there are a few more people that we need to sign off on it, and we feel confident that we can communicate the urgency and this being the most effective and efficient way. And if someone has a better way to get this done, I'm all open, but at the end of the day, the surplus that we have, along with the the state court ruling, I think has put us in a position to be able to fund this in a way that's historic, that we've never seen before.
We're about 5 weeks away from the fall council session. What are your key goals going into that session?
I have some new bills that I'm going to be introducing this fall. I think that we've been very thoughtful and effective in the legislation that I've introduced in the past. So there will be a couple new bills that I'll be introducing, but then I'll also be looking to pass a few bills that I've already introduced as well too. So when you talk about the Citizens Watchdog Act, when you talk about the NIL Protection Act, two bills that I introduced in the past that we're looking to try to get across the finish line this fall to assure that these are things that are already implemented as it relates to city government when our next mayor comes in. We also have about two other bills that we're going to try to introduce this fall to try to, again, continue to improve quality of life issues as it relates to the citizens of Philadelphia. Outside of that, we'll be preparing for the transition of the next mayor. That's going to be really important. We'll be brainstorming and discussing our leadership in the future of city council leadership. And then we'll also be looking to clean up a few dollars and a few other fiscal things as it relates to this quarter.
So you touched on what my next question is going to be. This is Council President Clark's last session, and there's going to be an election this fall that will usher in a new council. How is this fall session going to be different from previous sessions?
This is going to be different for me because to me it's going to be emotional. Losing our council president who I felt like has meant a lot to me personally, who's helped me grow professionally as well as an elected official. I think that to me is going to be a lot in the sense of that transition. I think it's going to be a lap for the mayor to do his final lap around as it relates to his term in office. And, again, we're going to be working. We have a number of issues as it relates to the city of Philadelphia that we're going to continue to try to brainstorm and address as it relates to dealing with quality of life issues. And the work is going to continue. At the end of the day, the citizens of Philadelphia elected us to work for them and to serve them. And, I believe in a servant leader mindset. So despite any emotional or personal issues that I might be facing or other council members might be facing, we recognize that we still have a job to do. So this fall will be no different. You'll see a lot of bills pass, a lot of dialogue around the direction and the future of the city of Philadelphia. And like you said, of course, jockeying and advocating for different leadership positions for different folks.
What are you looking for in a new council president?
I think we got some great folks who've already thrown their hat in the race. I think the most important qualification is just leading by example. At the end of the day, the council president is somebody who has to, work really hard, be accessible, understand the dynamics that all of us are dealing with, both from a legislative perspective as well as the politics, and then, be able to have a vision for the future of the city of Philadelphia, not just about legislative and politics, but the operational side. A lot of issues that businesses as well as city employees face are technical ones. And so at the end of the day, we're constantly thinking about the services and the programs that we use and how we can be more effective as a city and best serve those who work for us. So, I think that the list of things that you really are looking for isn't the longest list in the world, because a lot of us know one another. We work together. I think it's just a matter of folks deciding who they feel like is the best person for the job in the moment that we're in right now.
So looking ahead a little bit to January, after the new council and new mayor is sworn in, what has to happen in those first few months to ensure that poverty is reduced over the next 4 years?
Well, I think when you talk about the first 4 months, the most important thing is to build some type of camaraderie as it relates to a working relationship between the members of the legislative branch of government, first and foremost, because there'll be a lot of new people as well as people who are one term or under. There'll be more of us who've done one term or under than people who've done more than one term. So developing some type of working relationship as legislators and as elected officials as it relates to how we get things done, but then developing a working relationship with the mayor. I wouldn't say there's one or two things that should happen right away to address poverty. When you're talking about addressing poverty, I think the most important thing you can do is, number one, give people an opportunity to get a quality education, which goes back to what we're trying to do around facilities and other issues that we're trying to address as it relates to climate, culture, and curriculum. You're not going to be able to fix schools in a couple of months. The other thing I think we need to be able to do is offer people quality jobs. Philadelphia does have a large percentage of our city living in poverty compared to other cities, over 20%. But a lot of those folks actually have a job. A lot of those folks are actually the working poor. So at the end of the day, we need to advocate and fight for quality wages. And it's hard to do that coming out of a pandemic when a business can decide to relocate right outside of the city of Philadelphia and pay a significantly amount less in taxes as they would if they were in Center City or another part of the city of Philadelphia that doesn't give you those type of tax exemptions like they give you down at the Navy Yard. So at the end of the day, a lot of people are questioning whether or not they should keep their business here. And if you don't rely on the foot traffic, like a restaurant or maybe a barbershop or a beauty salon, it's hard to convince people to stay here right now. And so at the end of the day, that's a big part of what our agenda has to be, is figuring out if we really want to move people out of poverty, how do we do so when, the national agenda really deals with things like inflation and cost of living and things of that capacity. But locally, we're not providing competitive jobs and competitive schools and opportunities to earn quality credentials and a quality education so people can compete in today's market. It's a complicated problem that will be impossible to fix in the first couple months. But I think the important side is being conscious of that the problem exists and having a working relationship with one another to be able to address these issues. But I'll say it time and time again. I've been very consistent. You know, we're not going to do anything about poverty or crime until we do something about our schools. As long as we continue to produce young people who graduate from high school and are only prepared for either prison or, you know, a simplistic job, we're setting them up for failure, and we're setting our city up for failure.
All right, and we are currently in the midst of Philly Legendary Hoops Month. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is an initiative that we started last summer. It comes under the premise that a lot of our young people who go to, you know, comprehensive neighborhood schools, a lot of our young people who live in the same impoverished neighborhoods that we were just talking about, a lot of young people go to free summer programs. Often free summer programs, you know, start in June. And this was in a prior life. This is what I did for a living. So I consider myself an expert in this space. They start in June, but they end, you know, late July or the first week of August. And young people have all this idle time at the end of the summer between when free programming and school started. So we decided to bring a lot of the people who are already doing great programming together under the basketball umbrella of Philly Legendary Hoop Summer. And basically what we have is a coalition of people who offer a lot of different programs and services for young people throughout the course of the city that has now, for the first time for most of these organizations, received some type of funding and support from the city of Philadelphia, but B, also because we see a united effort, it puts us in a position where we can market and provide more programs and services to young people all across the city. So whether you're talking about camps, clinics, leagues, the Daily Rump Classic, which championship is the night, this is a great time to show that basketball is a big part of the DNA of the city of Philadelphia, and also to show that our young people can convene and come together in spaces and places that are positive and there be no incidents. I was at the Rump Classic. I've been at the Chosen League. I've went to other events across the city of Philadelphia, and there are a ton more as it relates to Philly Legendary Hoops Month. And, you know, these events are really part of the DNA and the culture of Philadelphia. And they also show another side of the positivity that exists within our young people and the creativity that exists within their skill set, right? Because just because it's basketball doesn't mean that that's the only thing being showcased. When I went to the Rump Classic the other day, I seen about 30 different photographers, young people who had press passes, who were able to be on the court taking pictures of NBA players and Philly legends like Allen Iverson, you know, children being able to meet some of their idols who often aren't in the city, but coming to the city this month to see family and friends, to work out and stay in shape, but also to participate in Philly Legendary Hoops Month. So we're really excited about the product that we have, and we think that it's only going to get bigger and better year after year.
All right, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Larry. I appreciate it. Tell Denise I missed her today as well, too.
She is actually in Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh,
waiting
smart.
For her flight home because she was delayed. And fresh from Birmingham, Alabama, here is Denise Clay Murray.
Hi, that was nice of him.
And so you are not. And before we get to the NABJ conference, we have to talk about very briefly the journey you had to take to get home from the NABJ conference. So the conference ended on Saturday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to leave on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
You're going from Birmingham to Atlanta to Philadelphia. What happened?
Well, first of all, the modern aviation industry is trash, and we need to get all our money back that we gave them in terms of American Rescue Plan funds, because obviously someone is smoking it. They're not using it to make airline service more efficient. We had a 6:34 flight, no, 6:25 flight on Sunday. It then got moved back to 7 and then to 10. And by the time we finally, went to a hotel and got some rest, the flight was supposed to leave at like 1 o'clock in the morning before it was canceled due to the fact that they didn't have staff to, staff the plane. And then we finally started to leave on Monday. They get all of us on the plane, go to Atlanta because there was some like storms and different things going on. They get us on the plane to go to Atlanta. We sit in the plane for 2 hours before they take us all off of the plane again. And then they put us back on the plane and we finally make it to Atlanta and we didn't end up leaving from Atlanta to Philadelphia until 12:30 due to like weather in Philly. And then we finally got home at 2:30 Tuesday morning. And I think what angered me the most about this is that the folks at Delta Airlines, which basically they're all becoming Spirit Airlines with nicer uniforms. But the folks at Delta Airlines accepted no responsibility for the fact that you had thousands of people totally inconvenienced by these late flights. I understand that you can't control the weather, but you also shouldn't have little old ladies sleeping in wheelchairs in the airport overnight, which is what happened, and which is what kind of I ended up going off on the guy at the Delta thing about it. I said, this isn't cool. If nobody else should have gotten a voucher for a hotel room, it should have been these two ladies, because older people should not be doing this. They should not be sleeping in wheelchairs in an airport. And it was just a hot mess. So the only advice I would give to people, if you're going out, if you're going to take a plane anywhere in the rest of this year, make sure you know what your rights are under the TSA in terms of canceled flights, being bumped from flights, oversold flights. Make sure you know what your rights are, because you're going to have to utilize them.
Yeah, and it's a pervasive problem. I didn't have any trouble getting home, but I still saw things that if they had happened to me, I would have been very upset about. And I'm usually relatively calm about these things, but no, I understand where you come from 100%. Now, with that unpleasantness out of the way, tell us about the conference and why this is such an important thing.
Well, Larry was among the folks that participated in a workshop I did on creating local media outlets. If you're here in Philadelphia and you see, part of the reason why Hall Monitor exists is because city council coverage isn't what it used to be. There's not enough. The Inquirer doesn't send people to city council every week now. And there's not a whole lot of coverage of the meetings that you have to go through to get to a piece of legislation. And what we were talking about, it was myself, Larry, and Tracy Powell, who is the CEO and founder of the Pivot Fund, which is a fund that finances startups, media startups in the South. What we talked about was what was important for people to know before they started a local media outlet. Now, the reason why we were in Birmingham this year is because the Birmingham chapter brought NABJ, and it usually doesn't. We don't usually have our conferences in cities that small, but we had it in Birmingham this year, and in a way, it was a good. I'm kind of glad of that for two reasons. One, if you are a reader of the Philadelphia Tribune in the early 1990s, you probably remember a gentleman named Barnett Wright. He was the managing editor of the paper at the time. He is now the executive editor of the Birmingham Times, which is an African-American newspaper in Birmingham, and it's a really very good one. So I got a chance to catch up with him and his wife, Tanya, and find out a little bit more about, Birmingham itself. And I realized a couple of things. One, it has a relationship to the civil rights movement that not a lot of places do. And two, while we were in Alabama, what folks are calling the Fade in the Water or the Montgomery Riverboat Brawl occurred. And that talks a little bit about the relationship that Alabama has to its civil rights past. We went to the 16th Street Baptist Church, and for folks who don't know what that is, why that's significant, that was where the church that was bombed and led to the deaths of 4 little girls who, if you ever get a chance to see the Spike Lee documentary, 4 Little Girls, it tells that story and tells it well. But we went to the church where that took place, and there's a marker that shows exactly, where the section of the church in which it took place. There used to be a staircase in the back of the church, but that staircase doesn't exist anymore because after the bomb was placed underneath it and they rebuilt the church, they decided not to put that there. It's become a museum, more or less, and while they still have regular services there, Vincent Thompson, a friend of the show, went to the Sunday service at the 16th Street Baptist Church on the Sunday before I was supposed to leave. And they show you, all of the different things about what happened in the civil rights movement in Birmingham and also what happened at that particular church. Right next door to the church is the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum, which gets into a little more depth about Birmingham and Alabama and its place in the civil rights movement and some of the things that went on in Birmingham and how they are still important today. And then right across the street from both the 16th Street Baptist Church and the Civil Rights Museum is a statuary garden in Kelly Park. Now, Kelly Park was where folks would gather before they would do marches and protests. It was like a staging area. And there was one protest that was done in Birmingham that was done by children because the adults were told by their employers, if you participate in a protest, I'm going to fire you. And folks didn't want to lose their jobs behind that. So a group of kids decided, well, since our parents can't do it, but it needs to be done, we're going to do it. And one of the things the statue garden illustrates is what happened as a result of that, which was these kids getting dogs sicked on them and water hoses turned on them. And some of the statues are really, they're really hard to look at because you see the teeth and the claws of these dogs coming at these kids. And you're like, wow, this actually happened. This was America back in the early 1960s. I mean, that happened a year before I was born.
Not long ago.
Not long ago at all. And in light of the fact that you have places like Florida that are trying to teach this history in a way that it has no connection to what actually happened, it's really important that sites like that are there. And speaking of which, one of the workshops that I was really trying to make on Friday morning was a workshop called The Attack on Black History. It was done during the NABJ convention. And Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Project, was on the panel as part of this. Another person that was supposed to be on the panel but decided not to come was Byron Donalds. And Byron Donalds, for those of you who might be following this whole Black history thing, is a congressman from Florida who's very right-wing, very conservative, but one of the few things that he said that doesn't, that kind of betrays his image as the ultimate, Black Trumper, was when he said that no, slavery did not necessarily benefit Black people, despite what the folks in his party wanted you to believe. And he was supposed to be a part of this panel discussion to talk about the attack on Black history, but he didn't show up. And in a way, I was kind of surprised when it was announced that he was going to be there, because because the last time someone came to an NABJ convention with the intention of trying to defend some of the more racist things that Donald Trump said during the presidential campaign, it was when Omarosa Manigault, who was serving as Trump's liaison to the Black community, came to NABJ, and to say it got a little ugly would be the understatement of the year. I mean, I sat in on it for maybe 20 minutes before I decided that I was losing brain cells the longer I sat there. So, the thing is, we, as it is with most journalism conferences, you're invited in order to, for everyone to hear all sides of the argument. But one of the problems that we sometimes have, particularly with NABJ, is getting Black conservatives to come on and talk about their side of the argument, because most of the time it's when you believe something so strongly, you don't necessarily want it challenged, and in some cases it's got to get challenged. So I was kind of disappointed that Mr. Donald didn't come to the conference, because I was actually looking forward to hearing what he had to say.
That would have been interesting and unique. But what were there some other panels that you went to that were really interesting?
Well, I went to a panel. Well, we did a lot of panels on artificial intelligence, and that's important these days, because you don't know if we're humans, and this is us doing the show, but at some point you could get three, it could look like us but not actually be us, because somebody might decide, okay, well, we don't necessarily want Denise, Larry, and Lance on the show today, so we're going to put up some avatars that look like them that no one will notice. So there were a lot of workshops on that, and most importantly, there were workshops on things like, journalism ethics, and how to tell story, how to be a better storyteller, writing and shooting, better ways to shoot video. And one of the workshops I try to make every year at NABJ is the backpack journalism workshop, where one of our founders, Allison Davis, who used to be a producer on the Today Show, brings in the stuff that's in her backpack that she's using for reporting, the different technology that she's using, and talks about how to use it in a way that you can, tell stories better, and how to make your job a little easier sometimes because of the technology. So I always try to make that workshop.
And if you've ever seen the backpack I carry around, I could definitely use that workshop, because it's huge, and I get stuff out of it. So whatever's useful, hopefully you can share notes with me on that one.
Was there any discussion about how to cover blatant lies, like what's going on in Florida, where they say slavery was good for the slaves?
Oh, there were several workshops on handling misinformation, and how to tell what misinformation looks like and communicate it in a way that your readers and listeners can know what it looks like. There were several workshops on that, because it's become a thing. We used to be able to agree, even if we didn't agree on interpretation. We used to be able to agree on what a fact was, and we no longer agree on what a fact is, and that's a problem.
And was there a consensus on how to help readers or viewers understand? And I think I want to focus on Florida, because it's just such a clear example. When the Florida government says all schools are going to have to teach that slavery was good for the slaves, how do you cover that in such a way that you say, this is blatantly untrue, and now the state of Florida is perpetuating a horrendous lie?
Well, probably the best way to do that is to make sure that you have your facts straight and that you can communicate them effectively. How I personally handle stuff like that is, sure, I will say this is what this person said because that's what this person said, but then I follow it with, according to this source that I have that says this is what's actually going on. And and sometimes you just have to use plain old common sense, because if you have read anything at all about slavery, I was reading Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste on my way to and from the conference. Of course, I lost my book in the airport and all the time changes, so now I have to buy another copy. But I was reading that, and you kind of have to bring as many of your own personal experiences as you can into what you write, so, and be able to back them up with facts, with things that people can go to and check out on their own, and that kind of thing. Also, you have to be careful about where you get your information. You have to remember, one of the things that back when Temple would occasionally let me teach a news writing class, I would tell people that if you hand me an assignment and you are using Wikipedia as a source, you failed, because Wikipedia can be adapted by anybody. It is an open source program, which means you can put anything you want to on it and try to pass it off as true. If you're not getting the information from the direct source that Wikipedia used, then you have a chance of spreading misinformation. Use primary sources. That's probably the thing that was drummed into my head the most. If you can't get it from the primary source, come to as close to the primary source as you can. But don't just rely on whatever it is in front of you. The common thing that I often say to people is, if your mama says she loves you, have it verified by at least 2 sources. And I've found that has kept me out of libel and slander court, and has kept me from, looking real stupid. So that was kind of the message that was drummed into my head when it came to that.
Did anyone suggest asking the governor if he would like to have his children enslaved for their own well-being, and to give them some skills?
No, that did not come up. However, I can't blame you for asking that, because most of the people that have gotten on the air and have said these kinds of things about Black history, or about, just some of the things that people from marginalized communities go through in an average day and folks want to write off, they wouldn't. I think Chris Rock said it best. You wouldn't trade being a white person to be me and I'm rich, because folks understand that there is a privilege attached to it. And the thing is, if you wouldn't, it's like with the brawl in Montgomery. You had this family of white guys that were getting ready to beat up this Black man for doing his job and moving the pontoon boat so the river boat could dock and the people could get off safely. If it weren't for the folks that came to this man's aid, he'd have probably been beaten within an inch of his life. And if any group of Black people had done that if the roles were reversed and it was a white security guard and all of these Black people, the jails of Montgomery, Alabama would have been full that night. And I understand that in many cases folks don't want to recognize that America has still got some serious problems when it comes to how it treats people in marginalized communities. And I get that, having to come to grips with that may make you a little more, may make you a little, upset with things. But maybe if you recognized that the inequality still exists and work to fix it, we wouldn't have these problems.
Right. That's right. Well, Denise, thank you for telling us about that. I enjoyed my 24 hours at the conference. I thought you were wonderful as the moderator of our panel.
Well, thank
I thought
you.
it was a very good, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, no problem.
Now, what we'd like to talk about is something that I think everybody has noticed. Gas prices are going up. And the big question is why and what's going on with this. So Lance, tell us a little bit about that.
I'd like to link the story with Denise's story about the airlines, because it's deregulation that's causing a lot of these effects. When the airlines were regulated, there were rules that they had to follow when they canceled a flight, when someone couldn't get on the flight because they had oversold it, when a flight had to be canceled because the airline didn't have the staff or the airplane itself wasn't able to fly. There were actual laws that had to be followed to make sure that the passengers were well taken care of. As we've deregulated the market, a few things have happened. One is the prices for flying from a popular place to a popular place have gone down, but the prices for flying to most of the other cities in America have gone up. Many of the airlines have now failed and they've become consolidated, and there's only a handful of airlines left. So there's not really more competition. The airlines have found disingenuous ways to make money. So now when you get by a flight, they actually charge you extra for the seat. If you bring a bag, they charge you extra for that. If you want to have a snack on the plane, they charge you extra for that. And if there's a problem with the flight and they take you off, it's the same thing. You don't get the protections that you once received. And this is a function of deregulation that was supported by both liberal Democrats like Senator Ted Kennedy and conservatives. They agreed that if we let the market solve the problems, we'll all be better off. And what we're seeing now, 20, 30 years later, is that has not happened. And another example of that is gas prices. Anyone who's gone to the gas station recently has seen what's happening to gas prices. If we call up the slides, we can just see just how much of a rate increase there is. So this is a 1 month chart of the price of gas at the gas pumps. And what we're told is, well, look, the reason why gas prices are going up is because the old OPEC coalition led by Saudi Arabia has decided to stop pumping as much oil out of the wells. And Russia isn't selling, we're not buying any more oil from Russia. And it's so hot that the refineries aren't operating. And besides, we don't have enough drilling and we don't have enough in the way of refineries. But it turns out that all of those things aren't true. What's really going on is much simpler. And that is that the oil prices are rising because the companies that control the wells want them to rise. And you can see that the oil prices traditionally have gone down after the majority of the driving season is over. And that's not happening this year. Instead, what's happening is we're seeing the gas prices going up. And it becomes very clear when we look at what's happened to the stocks of most of the major oil companies. They just had an exceedingly profitable year in 2022. And in 2023, this year, their profits aren't quite as high. And because these companies are what are called vertically integrated, which means that the oil company, ExxonMobil, owns the rights to drill. They own the well that drills. They own the pipeline or the boats or whatever mechanism they use, the trucks, to get the oil from the well to the refinery. They own the refinery. They own the pipeline or the trucks that get the gasoline from the refinery to the gas station, and they own the gas stations. Because of that vertical integration, there is no place to keep the pressure on lower prices. What ends up happening is ExxonMobil or ConocoPhillips or Shell Oil get to decide what's going on. And again, here you can see Shell Oil versus the stock market. Same as ExxonMobil, a tremendous year last year. And this year, the profits aren't as high, the dividends aren't as high, and the oil companies were looking at a reasonable return on their investment and decided it's very easy if we blame Saudi Arabia, if we blame Russia, if we quote unquote blame the Biden administration, and we just don't pump as much oil out, or even better, we pump oil out at the same rate, we just charge more for it. Because the laws of supply and demand don't work when you have a vertically integrated monopoly. And gas prices are up nationally by 8.26%. And in our region, Pennsylvania, it's not quite as bad, it's 7.5%. Now, the reason why I'm calling attention to this is because the gas prices are not 100% correlated to the oil prices. The 50% of the price of gasoline is directly related to the price of crude oil at the well. But the other 50% has to do with the sunk cost, the cost of the refineries, the cost of the pipelines, the cost of the wells themselves. So it should not be a dollar for dollar increase. If the well price goes up by $1, the most that you could correlate to would be a 50-cent increase at the gas pump. But in many ways, it's even worse than that, because the oil that comes out of the well isn't gasoline the next day or the next week or the next 2 weeks. It takes at least a month from a barrel of oil coming out of the well to reach a gallon of gasoline at the pump. So what we're paying for now isn't the price of oil on the spot market from the wells today. What we're paying for is what the price was last month. And last month, it was significantly less than what it is now. So the prices are being manipulated so that as soon as the oil prices go up at the well on what's called the spot market, they raise the price of gasoline, even though there's no real cause and effect. It's, again, the oil takes at least a month after it's pumped to go through the refineries, the pipelines, and get to the gas pumps. Now, we've all been told that the problem is there's not enough oil in the United States. And again, this simply isn't true. This is a chart that shows how much oil reserves there are in different countries. And you can see the United States, when we consider all the different places oil can be pumped from, we actually have greater reserves than Russia, Saudi Arabia, or any of the other oil-producing countries. What's happened is we are not accessing that oil. If you think about it from just a pure economic point of view, if you're the oil company and you decide that the oil is going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today, why would you pump it out today? And if you decided that you could manipulate the price by simply refusing to pump it out today and wait until the price goes up tomorrow, why wouldn't you do that? And because it's deregulated, because there's no requirement that the oil companies, even though it's a government lease, we lease the land to them, even though we all know we need gasoline, there's no requirement that the oil companies, after they get the lease, after they lease the land, actually access it. But it's not true that there's a shortage of oil in the United States. We have more than enough, and we can buy oil from other countries. An example of this is if we didn't have the current foreign policy, we'd be able to buy oil from Venezuela, which is one of the largest producers of oil. But because of the way we enter the world and because of our imperialistic tendencies, we have a tremendous amount of difficulty in buying oil from some countries. Now, here's what I'm talking about. This is clearly an example of what ExxonMobil is facing and why you can see the possibility of them raising their prices. So what happens with the stocks is the companies report every quarter. And there are analysts, the people who say, this is what's going to happen. You should buy the stock. You should sell the stock. And this is worth literally billions of dollars. So for the last 3 quarters, ExxonMobil has met or exceeded the projections. This quarter, when the price of oil is being raised and the price of gasoline is being raised, ExxonMobil did not reach its projected profits. They're still very profitable, but not as much as what the people who recommend what stocks a pension fund should buy or insurance companies should buy or hedge funds should buy. The analysts found that there was a small difference between what they thought ExxonMobil was going to be making and what ExxonMobil actually made. It's 3.5% less. The prior 3 quarters, you can see that the ExxonMobil actually made more than what was projected. As a result of the lower profits below what was expected, ExxonMobil stock has been falling. And it's not just ExxonMobil. It's also Shell Oil and any number of other companies that are facing similar problems. So to the extent that they have major stockholders who want to see those profits up, who want to see dividends, they are recommending to the board of directors that the oil companies withhold the oil and raise the price. Now, I recognize there are a lot of citizens who say, well, it's not President Biden's fault. It's not government's fault. There's nothing you can do. This is just supply and demand. And if we've discussed, it's not really supply and demand. It's just what the oil companies want to do. But the state of California has decided to try and protect its drivers, its motorists, its consumers by passing a law, the nation's first gas price gouging law. And what this is doing is this is setting up a body to study the price of oil and to decide whether the market's being manipulated and people are being overcharged. Now, there's absolutely no guarantee this will work. It's a new law. We don't know what the effect is going to be yet. But here's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to expose price manipulation in real time by requiring daily reports on the markets and imports. It's supposed to help prevent gas price spikes caused when refineries go offline, which is something that refineries and actually electric generators do. One of the ways that they can force the price up is simply to close down the refinery or close down the generating plant until the price goes up high enough for them to turn it back on and make the gasoline or produce the electricity. So this requires refineries to let the government know when they're going to close down for maintenance, so it can be staged in such a way that there's never 2 refineries that shut down the same week for maintenance. The law would increase accountability by getting monthly reports on refiners' profit margins, so we would see if there's price gouging going on or not. And the law establishes a new independent watchdog in the state of California. So that's pretty much what we're looking at. The prices are very clearly going up. There's absolutely no real reason for it. The Biden administration has been leasing more land for drilling, both offshore and onshore. The United States has more reserves than any other country in the world. We are building new refineries. In fact, we built a new refinery. It went online in 2022, and we continue to build new ones. So it's not a problem of permitting. It's not a problem of getting permission to build the refineries. It's simply an opportunity. And it's one of those hard situations because if you run an oil company, your sole job is to make as much money for your shareholders as possible. And if you can make more money by withholding oil or by shutting down refineries or simply by deciding to raise the price, and your competitor sees that your price has gone up 10 cents, so they can get away with raising the price by 10 cents, there's no reason not to do it. And as long as people accept it, and we have really very limited choices. Most of us don't have a lot of choice about driving. It's the way we get to work. It's the way we get to the supermarket. It's the way we do childcare. So if we're limited in what we can do, most of us just reach into our pockets and pay more. And of course, that leaves less for all the other things that are going on.
And, the oil companies operate as a cartel.
Yes.
And for people who I think people are familiar with that term from, drug cartels, but what it means in an economic sense is separate organizations really working together to sort of manipulate the market. And that's what they do. That's what OPEC is, really.
The bigger question in my mind, is why our government doesn't protect us. So we see the state of California is trying to do something, and we don't know yet whether it's going to be successful or not. There's nothing that comes out of the Biden administration, that comes out of the Democratic-controlled United States Senate, or even comes out of the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be Republican-led small business believers that price competition and markets work. There's no market when you have a vertically integrated company, and yet none of our government officials are talking about price gouging or talking about how this harms the economy, and talks about how price of oil and natural gas and gasoline, as they go up, cause inflation. And that, I think, is really the story here. Yes, it's horrible that we have to pay more and we have less for other things. Yes, it seems very bad that the oil companies have figured out a way to increase their profits in a slightly underhanded way. It's not that they're more efficient. It's not that they have a better product. It's not that they figured something out. It's simply withhold oil and charge more. But all those things being said, that's what business is there for. The oil companies are not social service companies or agencies. They're not there for the welfare of the American people. They're not there to protect us. They're there to make a profit. The problem is the people who are supposed to be protecting us, our government, looks the other way, or even worse, makes excuses for them. Says, well, there's the Ukraine war, nothing to do with the oil supplies in the United States. Well, the permitting is difficult. No, it's not. Well, there's no oil in the United States. Simply not true. Well, the government won't offer leases for drilling. Again, simply not true. And instead of saying, well, we're going to investigate, we're going to look at price gouging, we're going to look at what we can do to help consumers, what they really do is turn their back on us and say, well, this is just market pricing.
And, anytime that these companies say, well, we have to raise prices because of any of the things you just mentioned, at the end of the year or the end of the quarter, you can look at a graph, and the amount of money they raised there is almost exactly the amount of extra profit they made. So there isn't any of this,
And I think it's even clearer when you look at how the major oil companies this past quarter have not reached projections. So the people who say buy the stock are saying, well, they underperformed. And now what the oil companies are doing are saying, well, we're going to have to cut the dividends. So what we're going to do is raise the prices. So next quarter, we will overachieve and we'll be able to increase dividends and the stock price will go up. And many of the hierarchy of the oil companies, the CEO, the CFO, the COOs, have stock options. And rising stock price means literally tens of millions of dollars in income for the people who make these decisions. We ought to have a windfall profit tax on the oil companies and use that to fund SEPTA. Solve a couple problems all at once. Stop them from price gouging, and SEPTA would finally get the money it needs.
That's absolutely right. And that's why when we have these discussions about, well, we should privatize this and privatize that. Well, that's what happens. When a business is running things, their only responsibility is to the shareholders, not to the public.
I'm often surprised at how many people who think very high of Franklin Delano Roosevelt don't read his economic brain trust, which was A.A. Burley, who said, don't expect business to be social service agencies. They, by law, have to do what they can for their stockholders. It's government's role to protect citizens. This whole idea about they're good corporate citizens is really just not true. They're really good businesses that are supposed to do what they can for their stockholders.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that. Denise, thank you. And we'd like to thank Councilmember Isaiah Thomas for being with us tonight. And we will be back next week on Hall Monitor.